The morning sun cast long shadows across the grounds of Windsor Castle as Prince William walked slowly through the rose garden. His steps were deliberate, measured, as if each footfall carried the weight of 1,000 thoughts. The early September air held a crispness that hinted at autumn's approach, and the roses, though still blooming, showed the first signs of their seasonal surrender. Catherine emerged from the castle's side entrance, her silhouette framed by the ancient stone doorway. She wore a simple cream-colored cardigan over a flowing navy dress, her hair loosely gathered at the nape of her neck. There was something different about her this morning, William noticed immediately. Perhaps it was the way she held her shoulders, or the particular softness in her eyes as they met his across the garden. They had been married for over a decade now, and still, moments like these caught him off guard. The way she moved with such natural grace, the way she seemed to understand exactly what he needed without words being spoken. This morning was no different, and yet somehow it felt monumental. "I thought I might find you here," Catherine said softly as she approached, her voice carrying easily across the quiet morning air. The garden was their sanctuary, a place where they could simply be William and Catherine, rather than the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, rather than the future king and queen. William turned toward her, and something in his expression made Catherine pause. His usually bright eyes held a depth of emotion that took her breath away. Without thinking, she reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining with the practiced ease of two people who had navigated life's storms together. "I've been thinking," William began, his voice barely above a whisper, "about everything we've been through, about the children, about the future, about us." He gestured vaguely toward the castle, toward the weight of tradition and expectation that surrounded them always, even in these quiet moments. Catherine squeezed his hand gently, encouraging him to continue. She had learned over the years to read the nuances in his voice, to understand when he was wrestling with something deeper than the daily challenges of royal duties. "Sometimes I wonder if we're doing enough," he continued, his gaze drifting to where their children had played just yesterday. "If we're preparing them properly for what lies ahead. If we're showing them what really matters." The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. It wasn't really about their children, Catherine realized. It was about legacy, about purpose, about the delicate balance between duty and humanity that they had spent their entire marriage trying to perfect. A gentle breeze stirred the roses around them, releasing their fragrance into the morning air. Catherine closed her eyes briefly, breathing in the scent that would forever remind her of home, of this moment, of the man standing beside her who carried the weight of a nation's future on his shoulders. "Do you remember," she said finally, "when George asked you why people always bow when they see you?" William smiled despite himself, remembering his eldest son's innocent curiosity about the formalities that surrounded their family. "He was so confused when I told him it wasn't really about me." "And what did you tell him then?" "That it's about something bigger than any one person. About service, about putting others first." William's voice grew stronger as he spoke, as if reminding himself of his own words. "But sometimes, standing here with you, I think maybe the most important thing we can teach them is this." He gestured between them, to the simple act of two people choosing to face life together, to be present for each other in both triumph and uncertainty. Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes, understanding immediately what he meant. In a world that demanded so much from them publicly, these private moments of connection were perhaps their greatest gift to their children, their most important legacy. "They see us, you know," she said quietly. "Charlotte asked me yesterday if we ever get sad about being apart when duty calls." William's eyebrows rose slightly. Their 7-year-old daughter had always been particularly perceptive, but this question revealed a depth of understanding that both impressed and concerned him. "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That we miss each other every single day when we're apart. But that makes the time we have together even more precious." Catherine's voice grew warm with memory. She nodded like she understood completely, then asked if that's why we always hold hands when we walk together. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both lost in thought about their children and the unique childhood they were providing them. It wasn't a traditional upbringing by any measure, but they had worked hard to create pockets of normalcy, moments of genuine family connection that would anchor their children regardless of the roles they would one day inherit. A sound from the castle drew their attention, and they could see movement in one of the upper windows. Their children were beginning to stir, which meant their quiet moment would soon give way to the cheerful chaos of breakfast, lessons, and the day's scheduled activities. "Before we go in," William said, turning to face Catherine fully, "I want you to know something." There was an intensity in his voice that made Catherine's breath catch. After all these years, he could still surprise her with moments of profound sincerity that cut straight through to her heart. "I know this life isn't what either of us dreamed of as children. I know there are sacrifices, compromises, moments when the weight of expectation feels impossible to bear." His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "But I can't imagine navigating any of it without you beside me." Catherine felt the tears she had been holding back begin to spill over, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming gratitude that filled her heart whenever William spoke with such raw honesty about their journey together. "We're a team," she whispered, the words carrying the weight of every challenge they had faced, every joy they had shared, every moment they had chosen each other over the easier path. "Always," he agreed, bringing their joined hands to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was simple, almost old-fashioned, but it carried such tenderness that Catherine had to close her eyes to fully absorb the moment. When she opened them, she found William watching her with an expression of such love and admiration that it took her breath away all over again. "The children will be down soon," she said eventually, though neither of them moved to break the spell of the moment. "Just a little longer," William requested, his voice carrying a vulnerability that he rarely allowed himself to show, even with her. "I want to remember this exactly as it is." Catherine understood implicitly. These moments were becoming more precious as their roles evolved, as their children grew older, as the responsibilities of their positions expanded. Soon, William would be heir apparent to a throne that demanded even more of his time and attention. These quiet mornings in the garden would become rarer, more treasured. "I love you," she said simply, the words carrying all the complexity and depth of their relationship, all the promises they had made and kept, all the dreams they continued to build together. "And I love you," he replied, his voice steady and sure. "More than I thought possible. More every day." They began walking slowly back toward the castle, their hands still intertwined, their steps matching perfectly. Behind them, the roses continued to bloom in the morning light, bearing witness to a love story that had captivated a nation and would continue to inspire long after the last petal had fallen. As they reached the castle door, Catherine paused and looked back at the garden where they had shared so many important conversations over the years. Each bench, each pathway, each carefully tended flower bed held memories of their life together. "What are you thinking about?" William asked, following her gaze. "Just memorizing," she said with a soft smile. "The way the light hits the roses this time of morning, the sound of your voice when you're being completely honest, the feeling of knowing that whatever comes next, we'll face it together." William felt his heart swell with emotion at her words. This was why he had fallen in love with her, why their marriage had not only survived but thrived despite the extraordinary pressures they faced. Catherine saw beauty in the ordinary moments, found depth in simple exchanges, and had the remarkable ability to make him feel simultaneously grounded and capable of anything. "Ready?" he asked, gesturing toward the door where the sounds of their awakening household grew louder. "With you?" "Always," Catherine replied, and together they stepped back into their roles as parents, as royals, as servants to their country, carrying with them the strength and peace they had found in those precious, quiet moments together. The morning sun climbed higher as they disappeared into the castle, but the garden retained the echo of their conversation, the imprint of their love, the promise of more quiet moments to come. For in a life filled with public service and royal duties, these private exchanges of heart and soul were perhaps the most important work they would ever do together. Their love story had begun with fairy tale elements, but it was these real, honest, deeply human moments that made it truly extraordinary. As the day began in earnest around them, that truth settled into their hearts like a foundation stone, solid and unshakable, ready to support whatever the future might bring. The nation would never know about this particular morning conversation, but somehow, the strength and authenticity of their connection would radiate outward through everything they did, touching lives and inspiring hearts in ways they were only beginning to understand. And that, perhaps, was the most beautiful part of all. The afternoon rain drummed steadily against the windows of Kensington Palace as Catherine sat curled in the window seat of their private sitting room, a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. William found her there when he returned from his meetings, still wearing his formal suit but with his tie loosened and his expression carrying the weight of a particularly challenging day. She looked up as he entered, and immediately he could see that something had shifted since their morning conversation in the garden. There was a contemplative quality to her posture, a gentle melancholy in her eyes that spoke of deep thought and perhaps deeper realization. "How did the meetings go?" she asked, setting her teacup aside and making space for him on the wide window seat. William settled beside her, grateful for the warmth of her presence after hours of formal discussions about charitable initiatives and royal engagements. "Productive but exhausting," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "Sometimes I forget how many people depend on these decisions we make." Catherine reached over and straightened his slightly rumpled collar, a gesture so natural and intimate that it reminded them both of their morning conversation about the small moments that truly mattered. Her touch lingered at the base of his neck, and he closed his eyes briefly, allowing himself to simply feel cared for. "I've been thinking about what you said this morning," Catherine began, her voice soft and reflective, "about whether we're doing enough, about legacy and purpose." William opened his eyes and found her studying his face with that particular intensity she reserved for their most important conversations. He waited, sensing that she had spent the afternoon processing their earlier exchange and had arrived at something significant. "I received a letter today," she continued, reaching for an envelope that sat on the small table beside the window seat, "from a young mother in Manchester whose daughter has been following our family's charitable work." She handed him the letter, and William recognized immediately that this was one of the personal correspondences that occasionally made their way through the official channels. The handwriting was careful, deliberate, the kind that suggested the writer had taken great care with every word. "The daughter is 8 years old," Catherine explained as William began to read. "The same age as Charlotte. She's been battling leukemia for 2 years now, and apparently she's been collecting newspaper clippings about our visits to children's hospitals." William looked up from the letter, already understanding where this was leading, but needing to see the emotion in Catherine's eyes to fully grasp its impact on her. "She wrote to thank us," Catherine continued, her voice growing thick with emotion. not for any money or special attention, but for showing her that people in positions of power actually care about children like her. She said watching us visit hospitals made her feel less alone. The rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows as William finished reading the letter. The child's words were simple but profound, expressing gratitude for something he and Catherine did regularly without thinking of its broader impact. Yet here was tangible proof that their work mattered in ways they rarely got to witness directly. Her mother included a drawing, Catherine added, pulling out a folded piece of paper from the envelope, of our family visiting her hospital ward. The drawing was executed with the careful attention of a child who had spent considerable time on her artwork. Stick figures in recognizable royal blue represented William and Catherine, surrounded by smaller figures of children in hospital beds. At the center was a little girl with no hair but a bright smile, holding hands with the Catherine figure. William felt his throat tighten as he studied the innocent artwork. Here was their impact distilled down to its purest form, seen through the eyes of a child who found hope in their presence, strength in their example of caring for others. "This is what I was thinking about this afternoon," Catherine said quietly. "When you wonder if we're doing enough, if we're teaching our children what really matters. This little girl sees something in us that maybe we don't always see in ourselves." She moved closer to William on the window seat, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her against his side. They sat together looking at the drawing, both lost in thoughts about purpose and impact and the mysterious ways that simple acts of compassion could ripple outward to touch lives they would never know about. "I want to write her back," Catherine said eventually. "Not through official channels, not as the Duchess of Cambridge, but as a mother to another mother." William understood immediately what she meant. This wasn't about royal protocol or carefully managed public relations. This was about human connection, about honoring the courage of a little girl who had chosen to see hope in the midst of her struggle. "What will you say?" he asked, genuinely curious about how Catherine would navigate such a deeply personal response. "That her daughter's bravery inspires me, that watching our children worry about ordinary things like homework and friendship makes me think about her extraordinary strength every single day." Catherine paused, collecting her thoughts. "That sometimes the people we're supposed to be helping actually end up helping us remember why this work matters." The honesty in her voice reminded William of why he had fallen in love with her in the first place. Catherine had an incredible ability to find the human truth in every situation, to see past the formal structures of their roles to the real connections that made their work meaningful. "I think that's exactly what she needs to hear," William said, pressing a kiss to the top of Catherine's head. "And I think it's exactly what we needed to remember today." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the rain trace patterns down the windows and thinking about the unexpected gift this young girl had given them. In a world where their every public move was analyzed and critiqued, here was simple, genuine appreciation for the heart behind their actions. "William," Catherine said suddenly, sitting up straighter as an idea clearly formed in her mind. "What if we invited her to visit us here? Not for a photo opportunity or publicity, but just because." The suggestion was so typically Catherine that William smiled despite the emotional weight of the afternoon. She had a way of cutting through complexity to find the most human response to any situation. "Her doctors would need to approve any travel," he said practically, but his tone indicated he was already considering the logistics. "And it would need to be completely private. No media at all. Just a little girl getting to see that the people in her drawings are real," Catherine agreed. "Maybe meeting our children, seeing that royal kids worry about the same things she does when she's not in treatment." The idea took shape between them as they talked through the possibilities. It would require careful coordination with medical teams and security, but the core concept was beautifully simple: creating a moment of joy for a child who had shown them something important about the impact of their work. Her letter came at exactly the right time, William reflected, looking again at the child's drawing. This morning I was questioning whether we were doing enough, and this afternoon a little girl reminded us that sometimes just showing up with genuine care is everything. Catherine nodded, understanding the deeper truth he was expressing. In their roles, it was easy to get caught up in the magnitude of global problems, to feel overwhelmed by the scope of suffering they encountered. But this letter was a reminder that individual acts of compassion, multiplied across time, created ripples of hope they rarely got to see. "I want our children to understand this," Catherine said thoughtfully. "Not just the privilege of their position, but the responsibility to use it with intention and heart." "They already do, in their own way," William assured her. "George asks about the children we visit. Charlotte wants to know if they have toys to play with. Louis might be too young to fully understand, but he sees us making these visits a priority." As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of children's voices echoed down the hallway, growing closer to their sitting room. Catherine and William exchanged a look of shared understanding, both thinking about how to include their own children in the response to this special letter. "Should we tell them about the drawing?" Catherine asked as the footsteps approached their door. "I think they'd love to know that someone their age was thinking about them," William replied. "And maybe they'd like to create something to send back." The door burst open as Charlotte appeared, still in her school uniform, but with her hair slightly mussed from an afternoon of play. George followed close behind, carrying a football and wearing the satisfied expression of someone who had spent time outdoors despite the rain. "Mummy, Papa, we finished our homework," Charlotte announced with the pride of someone who had tackled a particularly challenging assignment. "Can we have tea now?" "Of course, sweetheart," Catherine said, carefully folding the letter and drawing and setting them aside. "But first, come here. We have something special to show you." Both children approached the window seat with the curious energy that characterized their interactions with their parents during these private family moments. William shifted to make room for them, and soon all 4 family members were crowded together on the wide seat, the rain continuing its gentle percussion against the glass. "A little girl who's been very sick sent us this picture," Catherine explained, unfolding the drawing again. "She drew our family visiting her in the hospital." Charlotte studied the artwork with serious concentration, her young artist's eye taking in every detail. George leaned in closer, his expression growing thoughtful as he processed what the drawing represented. "She's very good at drawing," Charlotte said finally, her voice carrying genuine appreciation for a peer's artistic efforts. "Is she better now?" George asked, with the direct concern of a child who assumed adults could fix any problem. William and Catherine exchanged a glance, both thinking about how to explain the complexity of serious illness to their young children without frightening them unnecessarily. "She's still getting treatment from very good doctors," Catherine explained gently. "But she wanted us to know that our visits to hospitals make her feel happy, even when she's not feeling well." Charlotte nodded with the solemn understanding of a child processing something important. "We should send her something back," she declared with characteristic decisiveness. "What do you think we should send?" William asked, genuinely interested in his daughter's perspective. "A picture of us all together," Charlotte said immediately, "so she knows we're thinking about her too." "And maybe some flowers from our garden," George added, warming to the idea. "The ones Mummy and Papa were looking at this morning." Catherine felt her heart swell with pride at their children's immediate instinct toward kindness and connection. Without any prompting, they had arrived at the same conclusion she and William had reached, that the most important response was simply to acknowledge this child's courage and let her know she was seen and valued. "I think those are wonderful ideas," Catherine said, pulling both children closer. Maybe we could work on something together this evening after tea. The rain began to lighten outside their windows, and William noticed that the late afternoon sun was beginning to break through the clouds, casting everything in a golden light that made their family gathering feel even more precious. "Can we invite her to visit?" Charlotte asked suddenly. Her question so perfectly aligned with her parents' earlier conversation that both William and Catherine started in surprise. "That's exactly what Mummy and I were just discussing," William said, marveling at his daughter's intuitive understanding of the situation. "If her doctors say it's safe for her to travel, we'd love to meet her in person. We could show her the garden," George suggested enthusiastically, "and the horses, and maybe play football if she feels well enough." Their children's immediate enthusiasm for welcoming this young stranger into their home reinforced everything William and Catherine believed about the values they were trying to instill. Without hesitation, Charlotte and George had embraced the idea of sharing their privileged world with someone who needed joy and connection. As they sat together planning their response to the letter, the family felt the particular contentment that came from aligning their actions with their deepest values. The morning's philosophical conversation about purpose and legacy had found its practical expression in this simple act of reaching out to a brave little girl who had reminded them why their work mattered. 3 weeks later, Catherine stood in the same rose garden where she and William had shared their morning conversation, but this time she wasn't alone. Beside her stood 8-year-old Emma, whose bright eyes and carefully tied headscarf couldn't quite mask the weariness that came from months of medical treatments. Despite her illness, the little girl radiated an energy that had captivated the entire royal household from the moment she arrived. "These are the most beautiful roses I've ever seen," Emma said softly, reaching out to gently touch a pink bloom with the reverence of someone who had learned not to take beauty for granted. Catherine knelt down beside her young visitor, bringing herself to Emma's eye level. "Would you like to pick some to take home? We could make a special bouquet just for you." Emma's face lit up with a joy so pure that Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes. Over the past few hours, watching this brave child interact with their family had been both heartbreaking and inspiring. Emma's gratitude for the simplest pleasures, her genuine delight in meeting Charlotte and George, her careful attention to every detail of her visit, had reminded everyone present why human connection mattered more than any formal duty or public appearance. "Could I really?" Emma asked, her voice carrying the disbelief of someone unaccustomed to being offered special privileges. "Of course," Catherine assured her. "In fact, I think we should pick enough flowers to share with all the nurses who take such good care of you." The suggestion clearly delighted Emma, who immediately began moving from bush to bush with the focused determination of someone on an important mission. Catherine followed, holding the gathering bouquet and marveling at how this child's presence had transformed an ordinary afternoon into something extraordinary. From the terrace, William watched the scene unfold with George and Charlotte on either side of him. His children had spent the morning playing with Emma, showing her their favorite games and treating her with the instinctive kindness that made him proud beyond words. Charlotte had insisted on sharing her art supplies, while George had patiently taught Emma how to kick a football despite her limited energy. "Papa, why does Emma get tired so easily?" Charlotte asked, her young mind trying to process the realities of serious illness. William considered his response carefully, knowing that this conversation would shape how his daughter understood suffering and resilience for years to come. "Her body is working very hard to get better," he explained. "The medicine that helps her fight her illness sometimes makes her feel tired, but look how brave and happy she is anyway." Charlotte nodded thoughtfully, then surprised him with her next observation. "She makes me want to be braver too." The simple wisdom in his daughter's words took William's breath away. Here was exactly what he and Catherine had been hoping to teach their children about empathy and courage, learned not through lectures, but through direct experience with someone whose strength humbled them all. "She has that effect on everyone she meets," William agreed, watching as Emma carefully selected another rose with Catherine's patient guidance. Emma's mother, Sarah, sat nearby, openly weeping as she watched her daughter experience pure joy for the first time in months. The contrast between Emma's delight and her mother's emotional response highlighted the weight this family had been carrying, the constant fear and heartbreak that had become their daily reality. Catherine noticed Sarah's tears and, after ensuring Emma was safely absorbed in her flower-picking mission, quietly approached the woman who had become much more than just another correspondent over the past weeks. "Thank you," Sarah whispered as Catherine sat beside her on the garden bench. "I know this isn't something you normally do, and I can't tell you what this means to her, to our whole family." Catherine took Sarah's hand in hers, offering the comfort of one mother to another. "Emma has given us far more than we could ever give her," she said honestly. "Watching her embrace every moment of this day, seeing her joy in things we take for granted, it's changed something in all of us." Sarah looked at Catherine with surprise, clearly not expecting such genuine emotion from someone she had only known through formal letters and brief phone calls. But Catherine's sincerity was unmistakable, and Sarah found herself sharing the deeper truth of their journey. "Some days I wonder how she does it," Sarah admitted, her voice thick with the exhaustion of months spent being strong for her daughter. "The treatments are so hard on her little body, and yet she wakes up every morning asking what adventure we'll have that day." Catherine squeezed Sarah's hand gently, understanding the particular heartbreak of watching a child suffer while maintaining hope and positivity. "She's learned something that most adults never master," Catherine observed. "How to find wonder in the present moment, regardless of what tomorrow might bring." As they talked, Emma had finished selecting her roses and was now examining a butterfly that had landed on one of the blooms. Her patience and gentleness with the delicate creature drew the attention of George and Charlotte, who approached quietly to observe this small miracle of nature. "Look how still she can be," George whispered to his sister, impressed by Emma's ability to remain motionless while the butterfly explored the flower in her hand. "She understands that some beautiful things need space to be themselves," Charlotte replied with the philosophical insight that sometimes emerged from children when they encountered something that touched them deeply. William felt his heart constrict with love for his children and admiration for the way Emma's presence had elevated their understanding of patience and appreciation. This visit had become an education for everyone involved, a masterclass in grace under pressure delivered by an 8-year-old who had never asked for the burdens she carried. The butterfly eventually flew away, and Emma turned to the royal children with a smile that seemed to contain all the sunshine of the afternoon. "Did you see how pretty it was?" she asked, her wonder at the simple encounter infectious. "Emma, would you like to see something special?" Charlotte asked suddenly, clearly inspired by an idea that had been forming as she watched their guest's reaction to the garden's natural beauty. Without waiting for an answer, Charlotte took Emma's hand and began leading her toward a secluded corner of the garden where a small greenhouse stood among the older plantings. George followed immediately, and the 3 children disappeared around a bend in the path, their voices carrying back in excited whispers. Catherine and William exchanged amused glances, both recognizing Charlotte's impulsive generosity and trusting their children's instincts about what would delight their visitor. Sarah looked slightly concerned about letting Emma out of sight, but Catherine's calm assurance helped her relax into the moment. "Charlotte has been cultivating her own small garden in that greenhouse," William explained to Sarah. "She's incredibly proud of the seedlings she's grown from scratch." When the children returned several minutes later, Emma was carrying a small terracotta pot containing a tiny rose bush, its first bud just beginning to show color. Her face glowed with the particular joy of receiving an unexpected and precious gift. "Charlotte grew this herself," Emma announced to the adults, her voice filled with awe. "She says when it blooms, I'll know that she's thinking about me." Catherine felt tears threaten again as she looked at her daughter, who had instinctively understood that the most meaningful gifts were those that connected people across time and distance. Charlotte's little rosebush would grow and bloom in Emma's garden at home, a living reminder of this magical day and the friendships that had been formed. "That's the most thoughtful gift I can imagine," Sarah said, her voice breaking slightly as she fully grasped the significance of what her daughter had just received. "We're garden partners now," Charlotte explained matter-of-factly. "Emma is going to send me pictures when it blooms, and I'm going to send her pictures of these roses all through the seasons." The simplicity and beauty of this arrangement struck all the adults present as profoundly moving. In a world of complex problems and formal solutions, these children had created a connection that would outlast visits and letters, something growing and alive that would remind them of each other long into the future. As the afternoon began to wind toward evening, the family gathered on the terrace for tea, with Emma positioned in the place of honor between William and Catherine. The conversation flowed naturally, covering everything from favorite books to silly jokes, to dreams for the future. Emma shared her hope of becoming a doctor someday so she could help other children who were sick, while Charlotte announced her intention to become a professional gardener, and George declared his ambition to play football for England. "What about you, Emma?" William asked gently. "Besides becoming a doctor, what else would you like to do when you're all grown up?" Emma considered the question seriously, her young face thoughtful as she processed all the possibilities before her. "I think I'd like to write letters to children who are scared," she said finally. "To tell them that being brave doesn't mean you're not frightened, it just means you keep trying to find good things even when everything is hard." The profundity of her response left the adults momentarily speechless. Here was wisdom that many people never achieved. Delivered by a child who had learned it through circumstances no one would choose, but had somehow transformed into strength rather than bitterness. "I think that's the most important job anyone could have," Catherine said softly, meaning every word. As the time came for Emma and her mother to return home, the goodbyes were tender but not sad. Emma hugged each member of the royal family with the fierce affection of someone who understood the rarity of genuine connection. She whispered something in Charlotte's ear that made the princess giggle and nod solemnly, clearly sealing some sort of pact between new friends. "Thank you for reminding us what courage looks like," William said, as he knelt to Emma's level for their final goodbye. "Thank you for making me feel like a princess," Emma replied, then added with the honesty that had characterized her entire visit, "Even though I already knew I was brave enough to be one all by myself." As their car disappeared down the long driveway, William and Catherine stood with their children in the garden where this extraordinary day had begun. The roses Emma had picked were arranged in a vase on the terrace table, and Charlotte's greenhouse stood ready to produce more gifts for future friends in need of hope. "I'm different now," Charlotte announced suddenly, her young voice carrying the weight of someone processing a transformative experience. "How so, sweetheart?" Catherine asked, genuinely curious about her daughter's perspective. "I understand now what you and Papa mean when you talk about our work," Charlotte said thoughtfully. "It's not about being important or having people bow to us. It's about using what we have to make other people feel less alone." William felt his throat tighten with emotion at his daughter's insight. This was exactly what he and Catherine had hoped their children would learn. But hearing Charlotte articulate it so clearly proved that the lesson had taken root in ways that would shape her character for life. "Emma taught us that," George added with his characteristic directness. "She showed us that being happy isn't about having everything easy. It's about choosing to notice the good things, even when the hard things are really hard. As the family made their way back toward the palace, each carrying their own reflections on the day's experiences, Catherine caught William's hand and squeezed it gently. Without words, they acknowledged that this afternoon had answered the questions they had been wrestling with since their morning conversation weeks earlier. They were doing enough. Their work mattered. Their children were learning the right lessons. And sometimes the most important education came not from teaching, but from being open to learning from the courage of an 8-year-old girl who had reminded them all what it meant to be truly brave. The roses in Emma's bouquet would fade, but the connections forged in the garden that day would bloom for years to come, spreading hope and inspiration in ways that none of them could fully imagine, but all of them would carry in their hearts forever.